She took her only son to her friend's wedding, only to see her billionaire CEO ex, the son's father, marrying the same friend. Part 2. I want us to be a family again, Nora. A real family. Thaddeus leaned forward across the candlelit table, his gray eyes, so like their son's, intense with emotion. Not just co-parents sharing schedules and medical updates. I want more. Nora's fingers tightened around her wine glass as the weight of his words settled between them. Thaddeus, we can't just pick up where we left off 9 years ago. Too much has happened. I'm not asking to erase the past, he said, reaching for her hand. I'm asking for a future. Together. The three of us. Before she could respond, his phone rang with a shrill urgency that made them both jump. Thaddeus glanced at the screen, about to silence it, when his expression changed. It's my father. He never calls this late. As he answered, Nora watched his face drain of color. What hospital? How bad is it? His voice tightened with fear. I'll be on the next flight. When he hung up, his hands were shaking. My mother's had a stroke. They don't know if she'll make it through the night. Oh, Thaddeus, I'm so sorry, Nora whispered, reaching for him instinctively. His eyes met hers, vulnerable in a way she'd rarely seen. They don't know about Kieran. My parents, they never knew they had a grandson. In that moment, the choice before her was clear. 9 years ago, he had chosen career over family. Tonight, she could choose compassion over caution. Then perhaps it's time they met him, she said softly. We'll come with you. All of us, together. The look of gratitude and love that washed over his face told her everything about the man he had become and the future that might still be possible if they were brave enough to reach for it. Have you ever faced a moment when the past and future collide, forcing you to decide what truly matters? Today's story continues the journey of a family forged through secrets, separated by misunderstanding, and potentially reunited by the courage to try again. If you believe in second chances, even when they come with complicated truths, stay with me for this emotional story of what it really takes to build a family. The candlelight cast soft shadows across the table as Nora and Thaddeus sat in her small dining room, dinner plates pushed aside, wine glasses half empty. Kieran had gone to bed an hour earlier, exhausted but elated by his science fair victory. The house was quiet except for the soft jazz playing from the speaker in the corner, neutral territory for the conversation that had been building between them for 6 months. I didn't plan to have this conversation tonight, Thaddeus admitted, turning his wine glass slowly between his fingers. I was going to wait, give us more time. But seeing you and Kieran today at the science fair, the way he looked at you when they announced his name, the way you looked at him, it crystallized something for me. Nora took a small sip of her wine, trying to calm the flutter of nerves in her stomach. What did it crystallize? That I want to be there for all of it. Not just the scheduled weekends and video calls. Not just the science fairs and doctor's appointments. Thaddeus's gaze was steady, intense. I want to be there for the everyday moments. The breakfast conversations. The bedtime stories. The ordinary days that add up to a life. You have a company to run in San Francisco, Nora pointed out, practical despite the way her heart had begun to race. Your life is there. My life is with my son, Thaddeus countered. And with you, if you'll let it be. The directness of his statement hung in the air between them, impossible to deflect or misinterpret. Nora set down her wine glass carefully. Thaddeus, the past 6 months have been good. Better than I could have imagined. Seeing you with Kieran, the connection you've built, how happy he is to have you in his life, it's been healing for all of us. But that doesn't mean we should rush into something more. Is that what you think I'm doing? Rushing? There was no defensiveness in his tone, only genuine curiosity. Maybe, Nora admitted. 6 months ago, you were engaged to my former best friend. Now you're talking about us being a family. That's a significant shift in a short time. 6 months and 9 years, Thaddeus corrected gently. What I feel for you didn't begin 6 months ago, Nora. It began 15 years ago when we met, and it never fully ended, even when we were apart. I want us to be a family again, Nora. A real family. Thaddeus leaned forward across the candlelit table, his gray eyes, so like their son's, intense with emotion. Not just co-parents sharing schedules and medical updates. I want more. Nora's fingers tightened around her wine glass as the weight of his words settled between them. Thaddeus, we can't just pick up where we left off 9 years ago. Too much has happened. I'm not asking to erase the past, he said, reaching for her hand. I'm asking for a future. Together. The three of us. Before she could respond, his phone rang with a shrill urgency that made them both jump. Thaddeus glanced at the screen, about to silence it, when his expression changed. "It's my father. He never calls this late," he answered, his voice immediately shifting to a more formal tone. "Father? What's wrong?" As he listened, his face drained of color. "What hospital? How bad is it?" His voice tightened with fear. "I'll be on the next flight." When he hung up, his hands were shaking. "My mother's had a stroke. They don't know if she'll make it through the night." "Oh, Thaddeus, I'm so sorry," Nora whispered, reaching for him instinctively. His eyes met hers, vulnerable in a way she'd rarely seen. "They don't know about Kieran. My parents, they never knew they had a grandson." The revelation shouldn't have surprised her, but somehow it did. In all their conversations about the past, about their separate lives during the years apart, they had never directly discussed his parents' knowledge of Kieran's existence. "I assumed," Nora began, then stopped. What had she assumed? That Thaddeus would have told his family about his son once he discovered him? Or that he had kept Kieran's secret from them, just as she had kept Kieran's secret from Thaddeus? "I wanted to tell them in person," Thaddeus explained, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of distress she recognized from years ago. "My father, he's not an easy man. I wanted to control how the information was presented, to protect Kieran from any potential negativity." Understanding dawned. Nora had met Thaddeus's parents only once, during their brief relationship. It had not gone well. Ambrose and Cordelia Lockhart had made it abundantly clear that Nora, the daughter of a high school teacher and a nurse, was not the caliber of woman they had envisioned for their son and heir. Their disapproval had been polite but unmistakable. "And now?" she asked quietly. "Now I need to go to Boston immediately," Thaddeus said, already reaching for his phone to make arrangements. "And I need to decide what to tell them about Kieran, if anything. My mother might be dying. Is this the right time to introduce this complication?" The word complication stung, though Nora knew he hadn't meant it as a reflection on their son's worth. Still, it echoed uncomfortably close to the language of dismissal she'd heard from his parents years ago. "He's not a complication, Thaddeus. He's your son, their grandson." "I know that," Thaddeus said quickly, regret flashing across his features. "Poor choice of words. I just meant the timing, the circumstances." Nora took a deep breath, weighing the various considerations. Kieran's feelings, the medical crisis, the complex family dynamics, and beneath it all, the conversation they'd been having before the interruption, the possibility of becoming a real family again. "Then perhaps it's time they met him," she said softly. "We'll come with you. All of us, together." The look of gratitude and love that washed over his face told her everything about the man he had become and the future that might still be possible if they were brave enough to reach for it. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "This won't be easy. My father can be difficult under the best of circumstances, and these are far from the best circumstances." "I'm sure," Nora said, surprising herself with her certainty. "Kieran should know his grandparents, and they should know him. If your mother is seriously ill, there's no time to waste on perfect timing or circumstances." Thaddeus reached across the table and took her hand, his fingers warm against hers. "Thank you," he said simply, "for this, and for everything you've done for our son. For the man you've helped him become." "We did that together," Nora corrected gently. "These past 6 months, at least." Something shifted in Thaddeus's expression, a softening, a vulnerability that made him look suddenly younger. "I've booked a red-eye to Boston for tonight," he said. "I can get tickets for you and Kieran on a morning flight tomorrow. I'll need to pack for Kieran, explain the situation to him, make arrangements for someone to feed the cat." Nora's mind was already racing through the practical details, a lifelong habit in times of emotional complexity. "Let me help," Thaddeus offered. "We can wake Kieran together and explain what's happening. Then I'll book your flights while you pack." The simple domesticity of the plan, making decisions together, sharing responsibilities, gave Nora a glimpse of what their life might have been like if the misunderstandings of 9 years ago had never happened. What it might still be like if they chose that path forward. 20 minutes later, they stood in Kieran's doorway, watching their son sleep peacefully, his science fair ribbon proudly displayed on his bedside table. His copper hair was tousled against the pillow, his glasses neatly folded beside the astronomy book he'd been reading before bed. "I hate to wake him," Nora whispered. He was so excited about the science fair, he could hardly fall asleep. We could let him sleep, Thaddeus suggested. Tell him in the morning. No, he'd want to know. And he'd want to be part of the decision about going to Boston. Nora was firm on this point. Their parenting styles had evolved over the past 6 months, finding a balance between her protective instincts and Thaddeus's belief in treating Kieran as an intellectual equal. In this case, she knew they both agreed that transparency was important. She moved to the bed and gently touched Kieran's shoulder. Sweetie, can you wake up for a minute? Dad and I need to talk to you. Kieran stirred, blinking owlishly in the soft light from the hallway. He reached for his glasses automatically. Mom? What time is it? It's late, buddy, Thaddeus said, sitting on the edge of the bed. But something important has happened, and we wanted to tell you right away. Kieran sat up, immediately alert. Is something wrong? Nora sat on his other side, creating a small family circle in the darkness. Your dad just got a call from Boston. His mother, your grandmother, is in the hospital. She's very ill. The grandmother I've never met. Kieran asked, his mind quickly connecting the dots. Yes, Thaddeus confirmed. My mother, Cordelia Lockhart. She's had a stroke, which means blood flow to part of her brain was blocked. I know what a stroke is, Dad, Kieran said, with the familiar tone of a child who disliked having scientific concepts oversimplified for him. Is she going to be okay? We don't know yet, Thaddeus answered honestly. It seems to be quite serious. I'm flying to Boston tonight to be with her and my father. Kieran absorbed this, his expression thoughtful behind his glasses. Your father is my grandfather Ambrose, right? The one who runs the family investment company. That's right, Thaddeus confirmed, exchanging a quick glance with Nora. They shouldn't have been surprised that Kieran had researched his paternal family online, but somehow the evidence of his curiosity still caught them off guard. Here's the thing, Kieran, Nora continued. Your dad needs to go to Boston immediately, but we thought that perhaps you and I might fly there tomorrow to join him, so you could meet your grandparents. But they don't know about me, do they? Kieran asked perceptively. That's why I've never met them before. The directness of the question created a moment of tension. Nora and Thaddeus had agreed early in their co-parenting journey to be honest with Kieran about their past, but to present it in age-appropriate terms. This meant explaining the miscommunication that had kept Thaddeus from knowing about Kieran, without dwelling on the painful details or assigning blame. They don't know about you yet, Thaddeus confirmed. I was planning to tell them in person during my next trip east. But now, with my mother's illness, everything has changed. So I'd be a surprise, Kieran concluded. A good surprise or a bad surprise? The best surprise, Thaddeus said firmly. You're their grandson, Kieran. Once they get over the shock, they'll be thrilled to meet you. Nora noticed he didn't directly address whether Ambrose and Cordelia would be immediately welcoming, which was probably wise. The Lockharts were complicated people with rigid expectations. Their reaction to discovering a previously unknown grandson, particularly one whose mother they had dismissed as unsuitable, was impossible to predict. What do you think, sweetheart? Nora asked. Would you like to go to Boston to meet your grandparents? It's completely your choice. Kieran considered this with his characteristic thoughtfulness. Will they be mad that you kept me a secret from them? If they're mad at anyone, it will be me, Thaddeus assured him. Never you. You've done nothing wrong. And if they're mean to Mom? Kieran's protective instinct toward Nora touched her deeply. Then we'll leave, Thaddeus said simply. Family is important, but how we treat each other is more important. If anyone, including my parents, can't be respectful to your mother, then they don't get the privilege of knowing you. That's non-negotiable. The firmness of his statement clearly reassured Kieran, who nodded slowly. Okay, I want to go. I've never been to Boston, and I've been reading about the MIT museum there. They have a whole section on quantum computing. Of course you have, Nora said with a fond smile, ruffling his hair. We'll try to visit if there's time. But remember, this isn't a vacation. Your grandmother is very ill, and the hospital will be our primary destination. I know, Kieran said solemnly. I'll be on my best behavior. I promise. You always are, Thaddeus assured him. Now, try to get some more sleep. You have a big day tomorrow. As they left Kieran's room, Nora noticed him reaching for his tablet, no doubt to research stroke recovery statistics or Boston landmarks. His insatiable curiosity was one of his most endearing traits, though sometimes it led to late nights and information overload. In the hallway, Thaddeus checked his watch. I need to head to the airport soon. My flight leaves in 3 hours. I'll help you pack, Nora offered automatically, then caught herself. Sorry, habit from our past life. You probably have your own system now. I do, but I wouldn't mind the company, Thaddeus admitted. And we should talk logistics for your flight tomorrow. They moved to the living room, where Thaddeus opened his laptop to make travel arrangements while Nora made fresh coffee. The domesticity of the moment wasn't lost on either of them. How easily they had fallen into a rhythm of shared tasks and decisions, as if the 9-year gap in their relationship had momentarily closed. I've booked you on a 10 a.m. flight tomorrow, Thaddeus reported. That should give you time to pack and make arrangements for the cat. I've reserved a suite at the Beacon Hill Hotel. It's close to the hospital and has enough space for all of us. One suite? Nora asked, raising an eyebrow as she handed him a cup of coffee. Thaddeus colored slightly. With separate bedrooms, of course. I just thought, for Kieran's sake, having us all together would be more reassuring in an unfamiliar place. Of course, Nora agreed, though the arrangement would place them in closer proximity than they had been since rediscovering each other 6 months ago. That makes sense. About what we were discussing before the call, Thaddeus began cautiously. Let's put that conversation on hold, Nora suggested. Your mother's health is the priority right now. Everything else can wait until we have a clearer picture of the situation. Thaddeus nodded, though she could see he wanted to say more. You're right. One crisis at a time. As he gathered his things to leave for the airport, there was a moment of awkwardness at the door, neither certain how to say goodbye. Were they co-parents? Friends? Something more, as their interrupted dinner conversation had begun to explore? In the end, Thaddeus leaned in and pressed a gentle kiss to her cheek. Thank you for this, he said quietly. For bringing Kieran to meet my parents, despite the complicated history. It means more than I can express. We're family, Nora replied simply. Whatever else we are or aren't, we're Kieran's parents. We do what's best for him. And is this what's best for you? Thaddeus asked, his gray eyes searching hers. The question caught her off guard. For so long, she had made decisions based solely on what was best for Kieran, rarely considering her own needs or desires separately from her role as his mother. I don't know, she admitted honestly, but I'm willing to find out. With that uncertain promise hanging between them, Thaddeus departed for the airport, and Nora was left to prepare for a journey that would bring them face to face with the part of his past she had never fully understood, the family that had shaped him, for better or worse, into the man who had both broken her heart and helped create her greatest joy. Have you ever discovered that the path to healing sometimes leads straight through your deepest fears? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because the courage to face our past often determines the future we're able to build. The following morning was a whirlwind of activity as Nora and Kieran prepared for their trip to Boston. Nora packed their suitcases while simultaneously arranging for a neighbor to feed their cat, notifying Kieran's school of his absence, and checking in with Thaddeus for updates on his mother's condition. The doctors are cautiously optimistic, Thaddeus reported during their early morning call, his voice ragged with exhaustion after a night spent in the hospital. The stroke affected her left side, but she stabilized. They won't know the full extent of the damage until she regains consciousness. Has she woken up at all? Nora asked, phone pressed between her ear and shoulder as she folded Kieran's warmest sweater. Boston in March would be considerably colder than the mild California spring they were leaving behind. Briefly, around dawn, she recognized my father but couldn't speak. The strain in Thaddeus's voice was evident. The doctors say that's actually a positive sign. And your father? How is he handling it? Like an Ambrose Lockhart, Thaddeus replied, a hint of bitterness creeping into his tone. Demanding the best specialists, questioning every medical decision, treating the hospital staff like his personal employees. But beneath the bluster, he's terrified. I've never seen him like this. Have you told him about Kieran yet? This was the question that had kept Nora awake for much of the night. No, Thaddeus admitted. It hasn't been the right moment. I'm waiting until my mother is more stable. He paused. How is he this morning? Nervous about the trip? More excited than nervous, Nora said, glancing toward Kieran's room where he was carefully selecting which books to bring. He's been researching Boston landmarks and making a list of questions to ask your parents about your childhood. I think he's viewing this as some kind of fact-finding mission about his paternal genetics. Thaddeus's laugh, though tired, was genuine. That sounds like our son. Always the scientist. Our son. The casual use of the plural possessive still gave Nora a small thrill, even after 6 months of co-parenting. For so long, Kieran had been my son in her thoughts and words. The shift to our son represented a fundamental change in her world, a sharing of both responsibility and joy that she had never expected to experience. Your flight is still on schedule? Thaddeus asked. Yes, we should land at Logan around 3:30 p.m. your time. Kieran's excited about the flight. He's been studying the physics of aviation. Of course he has, Thaddeus said, the smile evident in his voice despite his exhaustion. Text me when you land. I'll try to meet you at the airport, but if my mother's condition changes, we can find our way to the hotel, Nora assured him. Take care of your family, Thaddeus. You and Kieran are my family too, he said quietly. I'll see you soon. After they hung up, Nora stood motionless in her bedroom, his words echoing in her mind. You and Kieran are my family too. 6 months ago, such a statement would have seemed impossible, a fantasy from the alternate life where miscommunication hadn't separated them for 9 years. Now, it felt like a possibility taking shape, still fragile, but increasingly real. Mom, Kieran appeared in her doorway, interrupting her thoughts. I need help deciding which telescope to bring. The compact one is more practical for travel, but the HD model would be better for observing in a new location with different light pollution patterns. Nora smiled at her son's technical dilemma. I think we should leave both telescopes at home this trip, sweetheart. We'll be focused on your grandmother's health, not stargazing. Kieran's face fell slightly. But Dad said the view of the stars from his parents' estate is amazing. They're outside the city, so there's less light interference. This was news to Nora. When did Dad tell you about his parents' estate? Last night, after you went to pack, Kieran explained. He showed me pictures on his phone. It's huge, Mom. Like something from a historical documentary. He said it's been in the Lockhart family for 5 generations. Nora absorbed this information with a slight frown. She knew Thaddeus had grown up privileged, his education at exclusive private schools, his family's influence in Boston society, the trust fund that had financed his first tech startup, but they had rarely discussed the details during their relationship. Thaddeus had seemed determined to make his own way, separate from his family's wealth and expectations. Well, we're staying at a hotel in the city to be close to the hospital, she reminded Kieran gently. So the telescope would just be extra weight to carry. Okay. Kieran agreed, though not without disappointment. Can I at least bring my star chart of the Northern Hemisphere? The constellations will be different from what we see at home. Of course. Nora couldn't help but smile at his enthusiasm. Now finish packing your backpack. We need to leave for the airport in 30 minutes. The flight to Boston was mercifully uneventful, though Kieran peppered their seatmate, a patient retired physics teacher, with questions about jet propulsion and air pressure for much of the journey. Nora used the time to catch up on work emails and quiet her increasingly anxious thoughts about the impending family reunion. What would Ambrose Lockhart say when presented with the grandson he never knew existed? Would he blame Nora for keeping Kieran a secret? Would he welcome them? Or would his legendary coldness extend even to his own flesh and blood? And Cordelia, if she regained consciousness, how would she react to this sudden expansion of her family? Nora remembered Thaddeus's mother as an elegant, reserved woman who had regarded her with polite curiosity during their single meeting years ago. Unlike Ambrose, she had not been overtly dismissive of Nora's background, but neither had she been particularly warm. As the plane began its descent into Logan International Airport, Kieran pressed his face to the window, watching the Boston skyline come into view with undisguised excitement. Look, Mom, that's the Charles River, and over there is MIT. Dad said he'd take me to see the campus if we have time. Did you know they have a nuclear reactor right on campus? It's used for research, not power generation. I didn't know that, Nora admitted, touched by Kieran's enthusiasm and the way he casually referenced plans with Dad, as if Thaddeus had always been a fixture in his life rather than a recent addition. And Grandpa Ambrose went to Harvard, which is right across the river. Dad said there's a big rivalry between the two schools, kind of like a family tradition. Nora raised an eyebrow at Grandpa Ambrose, wondering when Kieran had made this nomenclature decision. She made a mental note to discuss with Thaddeus how they should handle Kieran's expectations regarding his grandparents. In his excitement, Their son seemed to have bypassed any anxiety about meeting these strangers and jumped straight to assuming a comfortable familial relationship. After collecting their luggage, they made their way to the arrival area, where Nora had expected to find a taxi to take them to the hotel. Instead, they were greeted by a uniformed driver holding a sign that read Lockhart. "Miss Sinclair and Master Kieran?" the driver inquired formally. "Yes, that's us," Nora confirmed, surprised. "We were planning to take a taxi to the hotel. Mr. Lockhart instructed me to bring you directly to Massachusetts General Hospital," the driver explained, taking their bags. "He asked that I tell you his mother's condition has improved slightly, and he thought you might want to come straight to the hospital rather than checking in first." Nora hesitated, exchanging a glance with Kieran. She had anticipated at least a brief respite at the hotel, a chance to freshen up after the long flight and prepare mentally for the family introduction. Going directly to the hospital would mean meeting Ambrose Lockhart while tired from travel, without any time to collect her thoughts. "What do you think, Kieran?" she asked, deferring to her son's preference. "Hospital first or hotel?" "Hospital," Kieran decided without hesitation. "If grandmother is getting better, I want to meet her as soon as possible. And I want to see Dad." The simple honesty of his desire to see his father squeezed Nora's heart. 6 months of building their relationship had created a bond that now seemed unbreakable, a connection that made her own complicated feelings toward Thaddeus both more difficult and more important to navigate carefully. "Hospital it is, then," she agreed, following the driver toward the exit. The car that awaited them was not the taxi or town car Nora had expected, but a sleek black limousine with tinted windows and the subtle Lockhart family crest embossed on the doors, a shield featuring a soaring falcon and the Latin motto Verity and Valor. "Whoa," Kieran whispered, eyes wide behind his glasses. "Is this Grandpa's car?" "It belongs to the family, yes," the driver confirmed as he held the door open for them. As they settled into the luxurious interior, Nora sent Thaddeus a quick text, "Landed safely. Your driver is bringing us directly to the hospital. See you soon." His response came immediately. "Thank you for coming straight here. Father knows about Kieran. Didn't plan to tell him yet, but circumstances forced my hand. Prepare for intensity. I'll meet you in the lobby." Nora's stomach tightened as she read the message. So Ambrose already knew about Kieran. The element of controlled introduction they had hoped for was gone. Whatever the patriarch's reaction had been, they would be walking into its aftermath. "Everything okay, Mom?" Kieran asked, noticing her expression. "Yes, sweetheart," she assured him, pocketing her phone. "Just a message from your dad letting us know he'll meet us at the hospital." As the limousine navigated Boston's crowded streets, Kieran pointed out landmarks he had researched, his excitement momentarily distracting Nora from her growing anxiety. His resilience and adaptability continued to amaze her. How easily he had adjusted to the discovery of his father, and now how eagerly he embraced the prospect of meeting his grandparents, despite the complicated circumstances. Massachusetts General Hospital rose before them, an imposing complex of modern and historical buildings. The driver guided them to a private entrance reserved for VIP patients and their families, another reminder of the Lockhart family's status and influence. Thaddeus was waiting for them in the discreetly elegant reception area, looking exhausted but relieved to see them. He was dressed in the same clothes from the previous night, his normally impeccable appearance rumpled from hours spent in hospital waiting rooms. "Dad," Kieran rushed forward, throwing his arms around Thaddeus with uninhibited enthusiasm. "Hey, buddy," Thaddeus replied, embracing his son tightly. "I'm so glad you're here." Over Kieran's head, his eyes met Nora's, conveying a mix of gratitude and apology. "Both of you." Nora approached more cautiously, taking in the tension evident in Thaddeus's posture despite his warm greeting. "How is your mother?" she asked. "Better than this morning," he reported. "She's awake now, though her speech is still affected. The doctors are more optimistic about her recovery." "And your father?" Nora kept her voice low, conscious of Kieran listening intently. Thaddeus's expression tightened. "Complicated. He's processing the news about Kieran." He turned to their son with forced brightness. "Kieran, I need to talk to your mom privately for a minute. Would you mind waiting with Ms. Reynolds at the reception desk? She has some juice and cookies for you." Kieran looked between his parents, clearly sensing the adult tension, but nodded agreeably. "Okay, but don't take too long." I want to meet grandmother and grandfather." Once Kieran was safely out of earshot, settled at the reception desk with a glass of apple juice, Thaddeus guided Nora to a quiet corner of the waiting area. "What happened?" she asked immediately. "I thought we agreed to wait for the right moment to tell your father about Kieran." "We did," Thaddeus confirmed, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. "But when I arrived, he had questions about why you were coming with me. He remembered you from years ago, Nora. He wanted to know why my former girlfriend was flying across the country to support me during a family crisis. And you told him the truth." "I had to," Thaddeus said. "I couldn't let you and Kieran walk into this situation blind. My father is, well, he's being Ambrose Lockhart about it." Meaning he's oscillating between outrage that he wasn't informed of his grandson's existence sooner and calculation about how this affects the Lockhart family legacy. Thaddeus's expression was a mixture of frustration and resignation. He's already called the family attorney to discuss trust fund implications and succession planning. "Succession planning?" Nora repeated, incredulous. "He's just learned he has a grandson, and he's thinking about inheritance?" "That's my father," Thaddeus said grimly. "Everything is about the Lockhart name and fortune, even family. And what about your mother? Does she know yet?" "Yes. I told her after she regained consciousness." Her reaction was, Thaddeus paused, searching for the right words. "Different. She wants to meet him immediately. She became quite agitated about it, which concerned her doctors. That's part of why I asked you to come directly here." Nora absorbed this information, trying to prepare herself for the complex family dynamics they were about to navigate. "How should we handle this, Thaddeus? What's the best approach with your parents?" He considered this seriously. "With my father, be direct but respectful. Don't let him intimidate you. He respects strength. With my mother, be gentle but honest. Her condition makes her emotionally fragile right now, but she's always valued authenticity. And Kieran? How do we protect him if things get difficult?" "We leave," Thaddeus said without hesitation. "I meant what I said last night. If my parents can't be respectful and welcoming to both of you, then we check into the hotel and reassess. Kieran's well-being comes first, always." The firmness of his commitment reassured Nora. This was not the Thaddeus she had known 9 years ago, the young man still seeking his father's approval, still vulnerable to family pressure. This Thaddeus was a father himself now, with priorities firmly centered on his son's emotional health. "All right," she agreed. "Let's do this." They collected Kieran from the reception desk and made their way to the hospital's exclusive wing for VIP patients. As they approached Cordelia Lockhart's private suite, Nora felt Kieran's hand slip into hers, a rare gesture from a boy who had recently begun to consider himself too grown-up for such displays of dependence. She squeezed his fingers reassuringly. "Ready?" Thaddeus asked them both, his hand on the door handle. "Ready," they confirmed in unison. The room they entered was spacious and tastefully appointed, more like a luxury hotel suite than a hospital room. Flowers filled every surface, their perfume mingling with the antiseptic hospital smell. Medical equipment had been discreetly positioned to maintain the illusion of a non-clinical space. In the adjustable bed, propped up with pillows, sat Cordelia Lockhart. Even in illness, she maintained an aura of elegance, her silver-streaked dark hair neatly arranged, a silk scarf concealing the hospital gown at her throat. The stroke had affected the left side of her face, causing a slight droop to her features, but her gray eyes, so like Thaddeus's and Kieran's, were alert and focused. Beside her bed, ramrod straight in an armchair that seemed too small for his imposing frame, sat Ambrose Lockhart. At 68, he remained an intimidating figure, over 6 feet tall with the broad shoulders of the collegiate rower he had once been, silver hair cut with military precision, his bespoke suit unwrinkled despite what must have been an uncomfortable night in the hospital. As they entered, both Lockharts turned to stare at Kieran with undisguised intensity. Nora felt her son shrink slightly against her side, suddenly shy under the weight of their scrutiny. "Mother, father," Thaddeus began formally, "I'd like you to meet my son, Kieran. And you remember Nora Sinclair." "The boy is a Lockhart," Ambrose declared immediately, his deep voice filling the room. "Those eyes, that bearing. No DNA test needed, though of course we'll have one done for the legal documentation." "Ambrose," Cordelia admonished, her speech slightly slurred but understandable. Is that any way to greet your grandson? Come here, child, she added, extending her right hand toward Kieran. Let me look at you properly. Kieran glanced up at Nora, seeking permission. At her encouraging nod, he stepped forward toward the bed, his natural curiosity overtaking his momentary shyness. Hello, grandmother, he said politely. I'm sorry you're not feeling well. Dad explained that you had a cerebrovascular accident affecting your left cerebral hemisphere. I read that physical therapy has excellent outcomes for recovery, especially when started early. A startled silence followed this clinical assessment, broken by Cordelia's delighted, if somewhat weakened, laugh. Oh, he is yours, Thaddeus. That mind. That wonderful, precise mind. Even Ambrose's stern expression softened slightly. You understand medical terminology at your age? He asked Kieran directly. I'm interested in all sciences, sir, Kieran replied earnestly. Medicine, astronomy, quantum physics. Dad's been helping me with the more advanced concepts. Has he indeed? Ambrose's gaze shifted to his son, something unreadable passing between them. And what do you call your field of expertise, young man? At your age, I was already certain I would follow the family tradition in finance. I haven't decided yet, Kieran admitted. Mom says there's no rush to specialize. That childhood is for exploring all possibilities. Now Ambrose's penetrating stare turned to Nora, who met it steadily despite her internal discomfort. Ms. Sinclair, he acknowledged with a curt nod. It seems you've raised an exceptional child, despite the unconventional circumstances. Thank you, Nora replied evenly, though I can only take partial credit. Kieran's exceptional qualities are very much his own, and genetically predetermined, Ambrose added pointedly. The Lockhart intellect has manifested in every generation. It's in the blood, along with the Lockhart arrogance, apparently, Thaddeus muttered, just loudly enough to be heard. Thaddeus, his father warned. Let's not begin with hostilities, Cordelia interjected, her right hand still clasping Kieran's. We have a miracle in this room, a grandson we never knew existed. Can we not simply appreciate that blessing before diving into family politics? Her reasonable tone seemed to defuse some of the tension, though Ambrose's rigid posture suggested his cooperation was temporary at best. You're right, of course, my dear, he conceded. The boy's parentage and future prospects are discussions for another time. He turned his attention back to Kieran. Tell me, young man, what do you know of your Lockhart heritage? Not much, sir, Kieran admitted. I just learned about you yesterday, but I've been researching online. Your family came to Boston in 1752 and made their fortune in shipping before transitioning to banking and investments. The Lockhart Foundation has funded significant scientific research, including quantum computing initiatives that Dad's company built upon. Ambrose's eyebrows rose appreciatively. Thorough research in limited time. A valuable skill. He nodded as if confirming something to himself. There may be a place for you in the family business after all, despite your unorthodox entry into the Lockhart line. Father, Thaddeus's voice held a warning note. Kieran is 8 years old. His future career is not up for discussion or planning at this point. Nonsense, Ambrose dismissed. I was reviewing commodity reports at his age. The early direction is critical for proper development of the Lockhart business acumen. Kieran will choose his own path, Nora interjected firmly, just as Thaddeus did. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees as Ambrose turned his full attention to her. Ah yes, Miss Sinclair, the woman who kept my grandson's existence a secret for 8 years. I'm curious about your motivation for that choice. Before Nora could respond, Thaddeus stepped forward. That's enough, Father. The circumstances surrounding Kieran's birth are complex and not appropriate for discussion in front of him or in Mother's current condition. I quite agree, Cordelia added, her speech becoming more labored as fatigue set in. Ambrose, take Thaddeus and get some coffee. I wish to speak with Nora and my grandson privately. For a moment, it seemed Ambrose might refuse, but a lifetime of respecting his wife's wishes apparently outweighed his desire to continue the interrogation. With a curt nod, he stood. Very well. Thaddeus, shall we? After a questioning glance at Nora, who nodded her assent, Thaddeus followed his father from the room, leaving Nora and Kieran alone with Cordelia Lockhart. Come closer, both of you, Cordelia requested once the door had closed behind the men. This stroke has limited my mobility, but not my mind or my eyesight. I want to see you properly. Nora guided Kieran to sit gently on the edge of the bed while she took the chair Ambrose had vacated. Up close, she could see the fine lines of strain around Cordelia's eyes, the slight tremor in her right hand as she reached to touch Kieran's face. You have your father's eyes, Cordelia observed softly, and his intellect. But your kindness, your curiosity about people rather than just facts, that must come from your mother. Mom says I get my best qualities from both sides, Kieran replied diplomatically. Cordelia smiled, the expression slightly lopsided due to her condition. Diplomatic as well, a useful trait in this family. Her gaze shifted to Nora. He's remarkable. You've done well with him. Thank you, Nora said, genuinely touched by the unexpected praise. I must ask, Cordelia continued, her voice dropping slightly. Why didn't you tell Thaddeus? All these years, he would have wanted to know his son. The question was asked without accusation, merely genuine curiosity, which made it easier for Nora to answer honestly. I tried to tell him when I first found out I was pregnant, but we had already separated, and my messages never reached him. By the time I realized he hadn't received them, months had passed, and I believed his silence was deliberate, that he had chosen not to respond. And later, when Kieran was born, Nora glanced at her son, who was listening intently. They had discussed the circumstances of his birth and Thaddeus's absence in age-appropriate terms over the years, but never in this level of detail. Pride, she admitted simply. Hurt. Fear that disrupting his life years later would only lead to rejection. I convinced myself that Kieran and I were doing fine on our own, that reopening old wounds would only cause more pain. Cordelia nodded slowly, accepting this explanation without judgment. And how did you two finally reconnect? Mom's friend Imogen was getting married, Kieran supplied eagerly. But when we got to the wedding, it turned out she was marrying Dad. It was a big surprise for everyone. I imagine it was, Cordelia said, her eyes widening slightly. What a remarkable coincidence. Or fate, Nora suggested quietly. Sometimes the universe has its own timeline for bringing people together. Indeed, Cordelia agreed, studying Nora with new interest. And now, you and Thaddeus, are you reconciling as well? The directness of the question caught Nora off guard. We're finding our way forward as co-parents, she answered carefully. Kieran's well-being is our priority. Of course it is, Cordelia said. But children benefit most from parents who are honest with each other, and with themselves, about their feelings. Her gaze was penetrating despite her weakened condition. I remember you from years ago, Nora. I remember thinking my son had finally found someone who saw him for himself, not for the Lockhart name or fortune. I did, Nora confirmed softly. I always did. I should have said something then, Cordelia continued, regret evident in her tone. Should have supported you both against Ambrose's prejudices. Perhaps if I had. We can't change the past, Nora said gently. Only move forward from where we are now. Wise words, Cordelia acknowledged. And where are you now, the two of you? Nora hesitated, aware of Kieran's attentive presence. At a crossroads, perhaps. There's still much to discuss, to understand about each other after so many years apart. Mom and Dad were having a special dinner last night, when you got sick, Kieran volunteered helpfully. They seemed like they had important things to talk about. Cordelia's expression brightened with interest. Were they indeed? How fascinating. Nora felt herself blushing under the older woman's knowing gaze. It was just dinner, she demurred. In my experience, my dear, there is no such thing as just dinner between two people with your particular history. Cordelia's voice, though weakened by her condition, carried the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being heard. Life offers few second chances. When they appear, the wise recognize them for the gifts they are. Before Nora could respond to this philosophical observation, the door opened and Thaddeus returned, his expression tight with controlled anger. Ambrose followed behind him, equally tense. Everything all right? Nora asked, immediately alert to the tension between father and son. Perfectly fine, Thaddeus replied with forced casualness. Father was just sharing his thoughts on our current living arrangements. The boy should spend summers at the Lockhart estate, Ambrose stated flatly, as if continuing an argument. Begin integrating into Boston society. There are educational opportunities here that California simply cannot provide. And I explained that Kieran's summer plans are already arranged, Thaddeus countered, his tone deliberately light despite the steel beneath it. Space camp in Florida, remember, buddy? Space camp, Kieran confirmed enthusiastically. They have a mock mission control and everything. Space exploration is a passing fancy, Ambrose dismissed. The real opportunities lie in finance and technology. The Lockhart legacy. Father, Thaddeus interrupted firmly. We're not discussing this now. Mother needs rest, and Kieran and Nora have had a long journey. The tension between them was palpable, two strong wills locked in silent combat. Nora could see why Thaddeus had distanced himself from his family's influence. The weight of expectation, the assumption of control over his choices, would have been suffocating for someone determined to make his own way. Perhaps we should continue this conversation tomorrow, Cordelia suggested diplomatically, though her expression suggested she had pieced together the source of conflict. I find myself rather tired now. Of course, Mother, Thaddeus agreed immediately. We'll check into the hotel and come back in the morning when you're rested. Nonsense, Ambrose interjected. The family estate has more than enough room. You'll stay there, of course. Another silent battle of wills played out between father and son, visible in the tightening of Thaddeus's jaw and the unyielding set of Ambrose's shoulders. The hotel is already arranged, Thaddeus said finally. But thank you for the offer, Father. At least come for dinner tomorrow, Cordelia suggested, reaching for compromise. I'll likely be discharged by then if my progress continues. The doctors say familiar surroundings will aid my recovery. Thaddeus hesitated, glancing at Nora as if seeking her input. The silent communication between them, the shared decision-making that had evolved during their months of co-parenting, didn't go unnoticed by his observant mother. That would be lovely, Nora answered for both of them. If you're feeling up to company. For my grandson and his mother? Always. Cordelia's warm response contrasted sharply with Ambrose's controlled neutrality. As they prepared to leave, Kieran surprised everyone by carefully hugging his grandmother, mindful of her condition. I hope you feel better soon, he said earnestly. I have lots of questions about Dad when he was my age. And I have many stories to tell you, Cordelia promised, visibly touched by the gesture. Perhaps tomorrow. In the hallway outside the hospital room, Thaddeus released a long breath, the tension of the visit finally showing in his expression. Well, that went about as expected. Your mother is lovely, Nora offered sincerely. Much warmer than I remembered. Illness has softened her, Thaddeus observed. Or perhaps meeting her grandson has. Either way, it's a welcome change. And your father is exactly as intimidating as I remembered, Nora added wryly. More so, I'd venture, Thaddeus replied with a grimace. He's already planning Kieran's future at Lockhart Investments. During our coffee break, he outlined a 15-year educational and professional development plan that would position Kieran to take over the family business by 30. But that's your job, isn't it? Kieran asked, looking confused. Running the family business? Thaddeus knelt to his son's level, meeting his curious gaze directly. My job is running Lockhart Innovations, my company, which I built separately from the family business. Grandfather runs Lockhart Investments, which is the traditional family company, and he wanted you to run it instead of starting your own company, Kieran deduced perceptively. That's right, Thaddeus confirmed. We disagreed about my future, just as we might disagree about yours. But here's what's important. Kieran, your future is yours to decide. Not mine, not your grandfather's. Yours. With guidance from the adults who love you, Nora added gently. Right, Thaddeus agreed, standing again. But never with expectations that ignore your own dreams and talents. Kieran considered this seriously. Is that why you and grandfather seem angry at each other? Because you didn't do what he wanted with your life? The perceptiveness of the question demonstrated once again their son's remarkable emotional intelligence, his ability to see beyond words to the underlying currents of adult relationships. That's part of it, Thaddeus acknowledged honestly. My father and I have different ideas about what success means, what's important in life. We're both stubborn about our viewpoints. Another Lockhart trait, Nora observed with a small smile. Indeed, Thaddeus agreed, returning her smile. One you've no doubt noticed in our son. Our son. There it was again, that simple phrase that connected them across years of separation, that bound them together regardless of whatever else might or might not develop between them. As they made their way out of the hospital toward the waiting limousine, Kieran between them, Nora found herself studying Thaddeus's profile. She saw the tension his father's presence created, the old patterns of conflict that had been reactivated by their reunion. But she also saw the man he had become, confident in his boundaries, clear in his priorities, unwavering in his commitment to their son. This visit to Boston, she realized, wasn't just about Kieran meeting his grandparents. It was about all of them confronting the past that had shaped them, the expectations, the misunderstandings, the choices made and not made. Only by facing these ghosts could they truly move forward, whatever form that future might take. The question was whether they were all brave enough to face those truths honestly, to risk vulnerability in the hope of building something stronger from the fragments of what had been broken. The Lockhart family estate stood on 20 acres of carefully maintained grounds outside Boston, a grand federal-style mansion that had been expanded by each generation since its construction in 1816. As their car approached through the stately tree-lined drive, Nora couldn't help but feel intimidated by the imposing red brick facade with its white columns and perfect symmetry. "It's like a museum," Kieran whispered, his face pressed to the window. "Do people really live here?" "Your grandparents do," Thaddeus confirmed, his expression a complex mixture of nostalgia and discomfort. "I grew up here, though it never felt much like a home." Nora studied his face, understanding better now the distance he had always maintained from discussions of his childhood. This place represented the weight of expectations he had fought to escape, the predetermined path he had rejected in favor of building his own life. "It's beautiful," she offered diplomatically. "It's a mausoleum," Thaddeus countered quietly, "preserved in amber like the Lockhart legacy itself." The car stopped at the grand entrance, where a butler waited to greet them. The formality of the welcome, the staff lined up with perfect posture, the doors held open with white-gloved hands, reinforced Nora's sense that they were entering not just a home, but an institution, a monument to old money and established power. Cordelia Lockhart received them in a sun-drenched conservatory filled with exotic plants and antique furniture. Just 24 hours after her discharge from the hospital, she appeared remarkably improved, though she still moved with the careful deliberation of someone acutely aware of her body's new limitations. "Kieran, Nora, welcome to Lockhart Manor." Her genuine warmth cut through some of the mansion's intimidating formality. "Thaddeus, darling, you look less exhausted today. Hotel accommodations satisfactory. Very comfortable, mother, thank you," Thaddeus replied, kissing her cheek. "You're looking stronger." "The doctors say I'm exceeding recovery expectations," Cordelia said with quiet pride. "Motivation is key, they tell me. And what better motivation than a new grandson to get to know?" Kieran beamed at this acknowledgement, clearly warming to his grandmother. "The recovery statistics for stroke patients who begin therapy within 24 hours are significantly better," he informed her seriously. "I read 3 medical journals about it yesterday." "Did you indeed?" Cordelia laughed delightedly. "Ambrose, did you hear that? The boy's been reading medical journals." At 8 years old, Ambrose Lockhart entered from an adjoining room, impeccably dressed in what appeared to be casual wear for him, pressed khakis and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than Nora's entire outfit. His expression remained inscrutable as he surveyed their small group. "Intelligence is the Lockhart birthright," he stated flatly, though application of that intelligence is what separates mere potential from true achievement. "Father," Thaddeus warned, the single word conveying his unwillingness to tolerate another lecture on Lockhart expectations. "It was merely an observation," Ambrose said mildly. "Dinner will be served in 30 minutes. Perhaps Kieran would like to see the library beforehand? The first edition's collection includes several rare scientific texts." Kieran's eyes lit up at the mention of rare books. "Really? Like what?" "Newton's Principia Mathematica, for one," Ambrose replied, a hint of pride softening his stern features. "And an annotated copy of Darwin's Origin of Species." "Can I, Mom?" Kieran asked, practically vibrating with excitement. Nora nodded her permission, watching as her son followed his grandfather from the room, already peppering him with questions about the collection. Despite her reservations about Ambrose's influence, she couldn't deny the genuine connection forming between them through their shared love of knowledge. "He'll be fine," Cordelia assured her, reading her concern. "Ambrose may be rigid in his expectations, but he would never deliberately hurt a child." especially not his grandson. It's not hurt I'm worried about, Thaddeus said quietly. It's influence. Father has very specific ideas about what makes a life worthwhile. As do you, Cordelia pointed out. As does Nora. Children navigate the values of the adults in their lives every day. Kieran seems remarkably capable of forming his own opinions. He is, Nora agreed, relaxing slightly. Sometimes alarmingly so. Nora, would you help me to the terrace? Cordelia requested, gesturing toward the French doors leading to a stone-paved garden area. The evening light there is particularly lovely, and I find I need to practice walking on uneven surfaces as part of my rehabilitation. Understanding the request for what it was, an opportunity for private conversation, Nora moved to offer her arm for support. Thaddeus raised an eyebrow questioningly, but his mother waved him off. Darling, go check that your father isn't offering Kieran a junior position at Lockhart Investments. We'll rejoin you shortly. Once they were alone on the terrace, moving slowly along the stone pathway bordered by precisely trimmed boxwood hedges, Cordelia spoke with unexpected directness. I owe you an apology, Nora, for the past and for my role in it. Startled by this opening, Nora nearly missed a step. I'm not sure I understand. 9 years ago, when you and Thaddeus were together, I saw how happy he was, truly happy, perhaps for the first time in his life. Cordelia's voice was contemplative, her pace deliberately slow as they followed the garden path. Ambrose was determined to end the relationship. He considered you unsuitable because of your background. I remember, Nora said carefully. He made his opinions quite clear during our one meeting. What you don't know is that I could have opposed him. Should have opposed him. Regret colored Cordelia's tone. Instead, I remained silent, allowing my husband's prejudices to dictate our son's future. It's one of the great regrets of my life. Mrs. Lockhart. Cordelia, please. We're talking about my grandchild's mother. Formality seems excessive. Cordelia, Nora amended. What happened between Thaddeus and me was more complicated than just your husband's disapproval. We had our own misunderstandings, our own failures of communication. Perhaps, Cordelia acknowledged. But families create patterns that children often replicate. Thaddeus learned from his father that career comes before personal happiness. That legacy and achievement outweigh love and connection. I fear those lessons contributed to whatever went wrong between you. They had reached a stone bench overlooking a reflecting pool. Cordelia gestured for them to sit, her movements still careful but steadier than the previous day. May I ask what's between you and my son now? She inquired directly. Beyond co-parenting Kieran. Nora considered deflecting the question, but found herself wanting to answer honestly. There was something about Cordelia's direct manner, free from judgment or manipulation, that invited confidence. I don't know, she admitted. We're in a better place than I could have imagined 6 months ago. We work well together as parents. We've developed a friendship based on mutual respect. And there are feelings. Complicated ones. Love is always complicated, Cordelia observed. Especially when it has a history. He was about to tell me he wants us to try again as a family, Nora said quietly. The night you had your stroke. We were having dinner, and he said he wanted more than co-parenting. He wanted us to be a real family. And what did you say? I didn't get the chance to answer. The call about your condition came before I could respond. Cordelia's eyes, so like her son's and grandson's, studied Nora's face intently. And if you had answered, what would you have said? The question hung in the air between them, demanding the honesty Nora had been avoiding even in her private thoughts. I don't know, she said finally. Part of me wants to try again. To give Kieran the intact family he deserves. To see if what we had once could be rebuilt into something stronger. But I'm afraid, Nora admitted, the words tumbling out now. Afraid that the same patterns will repeat. That career will take precedence over family again. That the next time there's a difficult choice to make, history will repeat itself. Cordelia nodded slowly, understanding evident in her expression. You need proof that he's changed. That the values Ambrose instilled in him have been replaced by something more balanced. Yes, Nora agreed, relieved to have her conflicted feelings so perfectly articulated. And I'm not sure that proof exists yet. We've been co-parenting under relatively ideal circumstances. We haven't faced a real test of priorities. I suspect that test may come sooner than you think, Cordelia said enigmatically. Ambrose mentioned that Thaddeus's company is facing some difficulties. Something about a security breach. This was news to Nora. Thaddeus hasn't mentioned any problems. He wouldn't, would he? Part of the Lockhart training. Handle business crises internally, never burden family with professional concerns. Cordelia's smile was tinged with sadness. Another destructive pattern I failed to correct. Their conversation was interrupted by the dinner gong, an anachronistic formality that made Nora smile despite the serious turn of their discussion. Cordelia accepted her assistance in returning to the house, moving with the deliberate focus of someone reclaiming control over their body step by step. "Thank you for your candor, Nora," she said as they approached the French doors, "and for giving Kieran the chance to know his heritage, complicated though it may be. He deserves to know all parts of himself," Nora replied simply, "even the parts that intimidate his mother." Dinner at Lockhart Manor was a formal affair despite the small gathering. The massive mahogany table in the dining room could have seated 30, making their party of 5 seem almost lost in its expanse. Ambrose sat at the head, Cordelia at the foot, with Thaddeus, Nora, and Kieran arranged along one side, a seating arrangement that seemed designed to emphasize the vast distance between family members rather than to encourage intimacy. Throughout the elaborate 5-course meal, served by silent staff who appeared and disappeared with choreographed precision, Nora observed the complex dynamics of the Lockhart family with growing understanding. Ambrose dominated conversation with questions thinly disguised as intellectual challenges, particularly directed at Kieran, whom he seemed determined to evaluate against some internal standard of Lockhart worthiness. For his part, Kieran responded with enthusiasm, unintimidated by his grandfather's formal manner and clearly delighted to have an adult take his scientific interests so seriously. Nora noted with pride that her son held his own in discussions ranging from quantum physics to financial markets, demonstrating both the knowledge he'd absorbed from his extensive reading and the confidence to admit when he didn't know something. "The boy has a good mind," Ambrose declared during dessert, addressing the observation to Thaddeus rather than to Kieran directly. "Raw material that could be shaped into something exceptional with proper guidance." "He already is exceptional," Thaddeus countered firmly. "And he's quite capable of guiding his own intellectual development with appropriate support." At 8 years old, Ambrose scoffed. "Hardly. Children need direction, structure, a clear path toward achievement. Your own education was carefully planned from preschool through Harvard Business School, with each stage building toward the next. And look how well that turned out," Thaddeus replied dryly. "I rejected the path, started over from scratch, and built something entirely different from what you planned. A company currently facing its first major security crisis," Ambrose noted sharply. "Perhaps if you had followed the established Lockhart methods rather than insisting on reinventing the wheel." Thaddeus's expression tightened, confirming Cordelia's earlier revelation about troubles at Lockhart Innovations. "My company's temporary challenges are not dinner conversation, Father. They are when they affect the family reputation," Ambrose insisted. "The Lockhart name has stood for reliability and discretion for 2 centuries. Now it's being associated with a potential data breach that has clients questioning the very security protocols you've built your reputation on." The tension around the table was palpable. Kieran looked between his father and grandfather with growing concern, clearly sensing the conflict beneath the ostensibly professional discussion. "What kind of security breach, Dad?" he asked, his curiosity overriding his discomfort. "Is it related to the quantum encryption protocols?" Thaddeus hesitated, clearly reluctant to discuss business problems in front of his son. "It's a minor issue with one of our security implementations," he said finally. "Nothing for you to worry about." "Minor?" Ambrose challenged. "The stock has dropped 12% since the news broke this morning. The board is calling for emergency meetings. Technical forums are speculating about fundamental flaws in your quantum approach. You're monitoring my company's stock?" Thaddeus demanded, his voice tight with controlled anger. "I monitor all investments with the Lockhart name attached," Ambrose replied unapologetically. "Perhaps if you had accepted my offer to serve on your board of directors, you would have had more experienced voices to guide you through this crisis." "I don't need guidance, Father. I need space to solve technical problems without family politics interfering." Dad." Kieran's tentative voice broke through the tension. "I think I might know what the problem is. With your encryption system, All eyes turned to the 8-year-old, expressions ranging from surprise to skepticism. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Nora asked gently. "Well, in my science fair project, I was studying Dad's published papers on his quantum encryption approach," Kieran explained, pushing his glasses up with one finger. "And I noticed that when applied to certain types of nested data structures, there's a potential vulnerability if the authentication keys are generated using the standard method." A stunned silence followed this observation. Thaddeus stared at his son with a mixture of disbelief and dawning realization. "That's exactly the vulnerability that was exploited," he confirmed slowly. "How did you possibly identify that from published papers alone?" "We only discovered it internally after months of security auditing." Kieran shrugged, suddenly self-conscious under the intense focus. "It just seemed logical when I mapped out the encryption pathways. The quantum state collapses predictably when forced through certain data structures, making the keys potentially derivable under specific conditions." Out of the mouths of babes, Cordelia murmured, a hint of amusement in her voice despite the serious conversation. "This is extraordinary," Ambrose declared, looking at his grandson with new respect. "The boy identified a security flaw that your entire technical team missed until it was exploited. That's true Lockhart intelligence." "It's Sinclair intelligence too," Nora pointed out firmly. "Kieran comes from both our families." Before Ambrose could respond, Thaddeus's phone rang with the distinctive tone he had assigned to his executive team. "Excuse me," he said, standing quickly. "I need to take this." As he left the dining room, Nora could see the conflict in his expression, the professional crisis demanding his attention warring with his desire to remain present with his family. It was a tension she recognized all too well from their past relationship. "Perhaps Kieran could help solve your father's business problem," Ambrose suggested to Nora, only half joking. "Since he seems to understand the technical issues better than Thaddeus's entire engineering department." "Kieran is 8 years old," Nora reminded him firmly. "He's not responsible for fixing corporate security breaches, no matter how insightful his observations might be. At his age, I was already analyzing company financial reports," Ambrose countered. "Talent should be nurtured early, not coddled." "There's a difference between nurturing and exploiting," Nora replied, her protective instincts flaring. "Kieran deserves a childhood full of diverse experiences, not a premature induction into corporate problem-solving." Ambrose's eyebrows rose at her direct challenge, but before he could respond, Thaddeus returned to the dining room, his expression grave. "I need to return to San Francisco immediately," he announced without preamble. "The situation is worse than we thought. Multiple clients are threatening to pull their contracts if we don't resolve the security issue within 48 hours. "You're leaving?" Kieran's voice was small, his disappointment evident. "But we just got here. We were going to visit MIT tomorrow." "I'm sorry, buddy," Thaddeus said, genuine regret coloring his tone. "This is an emergency. The company's future depends on fixing this vulnerability quickly." "I could help," Kieran offered eagerly. "I think I know how to patch the authentication process to prevent the key derivation." "That's very kind, but this requires a team of senior engineers working around the clock," Thaddeus explained gently. "It's not a project for a child," Kieran finished, hurt flashing across his features. "Even though I saw the problem when they didn't." Nora recognized the familiar signs of her son's emotional withdrawal, the slight stiffening of his posture, the way his eyes dropped to focus on his plate rather than on the adults who had disappointed him. For all his intellectual precocity, Kieran was still a child who had only recently found his father and was now facing what felt like abandonment all over again. "What if we all return to San Francisco?" she suggested, the offer surprising even herself. "We can reschedule the Boston visit for when the crisis is resolved." Thaddeus looked at her with undisguised gratitude. "Are you sure? You've barely had time with my mother." "Perhaps we could join you in California next month," Cordelia interjected smoothly. "My doctors recommend a change of scenery as part of my recovery, and I've always wanted to see where my grandson has been growing up." "That's an excellent solution," Nora agreed, relieved by the compromise. "Kieran can show you his school, his telescope collection, all his favorite places." "I'd like that," Kieran said, his expression brightening slightly. "Our house isn't as big as this, but my room has glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling that Dad helped me arrange in accurate constellations." "I look forward to seeing them," Cordelia assured him warmly. Only Ambrose seemed displeased with this arrangement, his mouth tightening into a thin line of disapproval. Running back to California at the first sign of corporate trouble hardly seems like effective crisis management, he observed coldly. In my day, we faced business challenges head-on, without disrupting family obligations. This isn't your day anymore, Father, Thaddeus replied with quiet firmness. The technology sector moves at a different pace than traditional finance. Hours matter, not days or weeks. And family, Ambrose challenged. Where does that fit in your list of priorities? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with years of unspoken conflict and disappointment. Nora watched Thaddeus closely, recognizing that his answer would reveal much about how much he had truly changed from the career-focused man she had known 9 years ago. Family comes first, Thaddeus said finally, his gaze moving from his father to Nora to Kieran. Which is why I'm not choosing between my company and my family. We're facing this challenge together, as a unit. The way we should have been all along. Something shifted in Ambrose's expression, not quite approval, but perhaps a reluctant acknowledgement of his son's conviction. Very well, he conceded stiffly. Cordelia and I will visit next month, once your technical difficulties are resolved. Thank you for understanding, Thaddeus replied, though the tension between them remained palpable. As the uncomfortable dinner concluded, Nora found herself reflecting on the Lockhart family dynamics with new insight. The patterns were so deeply ingrained, Ambrose's rigid expectations, Thaddeus's defiant independence, Cordelia's diplomatic mediation. Yet there were signs of evolution too, particularly in Thaddeus's determination to prioritize family alongside career rather than sacrificing one for the other. Whether this determination would withstand the pressures of a genuine business crisis remained to be seen. The true test of Thaddeus's changed priorities lay ahead, not in words spoken across a formal dining table, but in actions taken when difficult choices had to be made. The next morning found them boarding Thaddeus's private jet for the return flight to San Francisco, a luxury that left Kieran wide-eyed with excitement despite the disappointment of their abbreviated Boston visit. As they settled into the plush leather seats, Nora couldn't help but reflect on the stark contrast between their current circumstances and the commercial flight they had taken just days earlier. "This is so cool," Kieran exclaimed, exploring the aircraft's features with unbridled enthusiasm. "It has its own conference room and bedrooms. Is this how you always travel, Dad?" "For cross-country business trips, yes," Thaddeus admitted, helping his son buckle his seatbelt. "But it's a company asset, not a personal indulgence." "Still pretty indulgent," Nora murmured, though without real criticism. After experiencing the full weight of Lockhart family expectations, she better understood Thaddeus's complex relationship with his privilege, how he simultaneously utilized its advantages while trying to define himself independently from it. As the jet climbed through the morning clouds, Thaddeus joined Nora in the main cabin, while Kieran explored the aircraft with the patient flight attendant who had offered to give him a tour. "Thank you," he said simply, settling into the seat across from her. "For understanding about the company crisis. For suggesting we all return together. For everything, really. We're co-parents," Nora reminded him, though the term felt increasingly inadequate to describe their evolving relationship. "Kieran's stability comes first. It's more than that, and you know it." Thaddeus's direct gaze challenged her to acknowledge the unspoken currents between them. "Before my mother's stroke interrupted us, we were having an important conversation. About our future. I remember," Nora said cautiously. "You said you wanted us to be a family again. A real family. I still do." The simple declaration hung between them, both promise and question. "But I understand if you need more time. If you need to see whether I've truly changed, or if the old patterns will reassert themselves under pressure." The insight surprised her, this awareness of her reservations, her need for evidence rather than just assurances. "How did you know that's what I'm thinking?" "Because I know you, Nora. Better than you might expect after 9 years apart." His smile was gentle, understanding. "You've always needed proof, not promises. Actions, not words. And you've always prioritized achievement over connection," she countered, though without accusation. "Career over relationship." "I did," he acknowledged frankly, "until I discovered what I'd lost as a result. Until I met our son and realized what truly matters." Before Nora could respond, Kieran returned from his tour, bubbling with excitement about the jet's technical specifications and the satellite communication system that would allow Thaddeus to work during the flight. The pilot said I could visit the cockpit once we reach cruising altitude, he reported eagerly. He's going to explain how the navigation systems work. That sounds fantastic, buddy, Thaddeus replied, seamlessly shifting his attention to their son. Maybe afterward you can help me review some of the security protocols we were discussing at dinner. Your insight about the authentication vulnerability was remarkably perceptive. Kieran's face lit up at this acknowledgement of his abilities. Really? You want my help with your company problem? As a consultant, Thaddeus clarified with a smile. Junior division, with appropriate limits on your involvement and full parental supervision. Nora watched their interaction with a mixture of pride and caution. While she appreciated Thaddeus's respect for their son's intelligence, she remained wary of any tendency to treat Kieran as a miniature adult rather than a gifted child who still needed protection and boundaries. 2 hours maximum, she stipulated, and only after he's had lunch and some downtime. Even junior consultants need balance. Agreed, Thaddeus said immediately, demonstrating the co-parenting rhythm they had developed over recent months. Work-life balance applies to all Lockhart Innovations team members, regardless of age. As Kieran headed to the cockpit for his promised tour, Thaddeus turned back to Nora, his expression growing serious once more. This company crisis, it's not just about a security vulnerability. It's about trust. If clients believe our quantum encryption methods are fundamentally flawed, everything I've built could collapse overnight. You'll fix it, Nora said with more confidence than she felt. You've faced business challenges before. Not like this. Not with the entire company's reputation at stake. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of stress she remembered from years ago, and not with so much more to lose personally. The vulnerability in his admission touched her. This was not the Thaddeus she had known 9 years ago, the confident entrepreneur so certain of his vision that personal relationships became secondary to professional ambition. This man understood what truly mattered, what could not be replaced if lost. We'll face it together, she found herself saying. Whatever happens with the company, Kieran and I will be there. The gratitude in his eyes was almost painful to witness. That means more than you can know. When they landed in San Francisco that afternoon, the situation at Lockhart Innovations had deteriorated further. News of the security vulnerability had spread across technical forums and financial news outlets, causing the company's stock to plummet and clients to publicly question the viability of quantum encryption itself. I need to go directly to the office, Thaddeus told them as they deplaned. The engineering team has been working through the night on a patch, but we need to make a public statement immediately to stop the bleeding. Go, Nora urged. Kieran and I will head home and get settled. Just keep us updated. I'll call as soon as I have news, he promised, dropping a quick kiss on Kieran's head before disappearing into the waiting company car. As Nora and Kieran drove to their own home in her considerably more modest vehicle, she could sense her son's concern despite his attempts to appear nonchalant. Dad's company will be okay, right? He asked finally, staring out the window at the familiar San Francisco streets. He seemed really worried. Your father is very good at solving problems, Nora assured him, choosing her words carefully. And he has an excellent team working with him. I'm sure they'll find a solution. But what if they don't? Kieran persisted, his analytical mind always pursuing every potential outcome. What happens then? The question cut to the heart of Nora's own unspoken concerns. What would happen to Thaddeus if the company he had built from nothing collapsed? How would he respond to such a profound professional failure? Would he retreat into work obsession as he had during previous crises? Or had he truly changed enough to maintain balance even in the face of career disaster? Then your father will start over, she said with more confidence than she felt. The important things, his family, his knowledge, his determination, those can't be taken away by a business setback. Kieran seemed to consider this perspective seriously. When my science fair volcano failed last year, you said failure is just information about what doesn't work, not a judgment about my abilities. That's right, Nora confirmed, touched by his recall of her guidance. And the same applies to your dad's situation. If his current approach doesn't work, he'll find another one. With my help, Kieran added firmly, since I already figured out part of the problem. With appropriate boundaries, Nora reminded him, though she couldn't help smiling at his confidence. When they arrived home, their neighbor Mrs. Powell was waiting with their cat and a collection of mail that had accumulated during their brief absence. Among the usual bills and advertisements was a thick envelope from the Metropolitan Fertility Foundation, the organization Imogen had connected them with for Kieran's Ehlers-Danlos syndrome treatment. "Your test results came in," Nora explained to Kieran as she opened the envelope. "Let's see what the specialists have found." The report was densely technical, detailing genetic markers and mutation patterns related to Kieran's specific variant of EDS. As Nora skimmed the medical terminology, one section caught her attention with alarm. "Patient exhibits rare collagen mutation consistent with cardiac involvement. Immediate echocardiogram recommended to assess aortic integrity." "What does it say, Mom?" Kieran asked, trying to peek at the report. "It says we need to schedule some follow-up tests," Nora replied, keeping her tone calm despite the spike of fear the recommendation had triggered. "Nothing urgent, just part of the comprehensive care plan." But as soon as Kieran was occupied unpacking his suitcase, Nora called the specialist number provided in the report. The conversation was brief but concerning. Kieran's specific genetic variant carried a risk of aortic weakness similar to what had affected Cordelia Lockhart, a connection that couldn't be coincidental. The doctor recommended an echocardiogram within the week to establish a baseline for monitoring. Just as she hung up, her phone rang with a call from Thaddeus. "How's it going at the office?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady despite her lingering concern about Kieran's test results. "Not good," he admitted, sounding exhausted. "The vulnerability is more complex than we initially thought. And there's another complication. A tech blog just published an article connecting Kieran's science fair project to our security protocols. Someone made the link between his presentation on quantum authentication and our current crisis." "What? How is that even possible?" Nora demanded, her protective instincts flaring. The science fair was covered by a local education reporter doing a feature on gifted children. Thaddeus explained wearily. "When news of our security breach broke, someone connected the dots between Kieran's project, his last name, and the similarity to our encryption approach. They're spinning it as CEO's son identified company's fatal flaw months ago. That's ridiculous. He's 8 years old. I know, but it's generating attention, and not the kind we need right now." Thaddeus sounded more worried about Kieran than about the company's reputation. "How is he? Has he seen any of this online?" "No, he's been unpacking since we got home." Nora hesitated, debating whether to add to Thaddeus's concerns with the news about Kieran's medical results. Deciding that honesty was essential to their co-parenting relationship, she continued, "But there's something else we need to discuss." The genetic test results came back from the Fertility Foundation. Kieran's EDS variant includes potential cardiac complications. They want him to have an echocardiogram as soon as possible. The silence that followed conveyed Thaddeus's shock more eloquently than words could have. "Cardiac complications? Like my mother's condition. It appears to be the same genetic variant," Nora confirmed. "The report suggests it's a hereditary form that came through the Lockhart line." "I'm coming home," Thaddeus said immediately, all thoughts of the company crisis apparently forgotten. "Right now, what about the security patch? The client meetings? They can wait." Nothing is more important than Kieran's health. The absolute certainty in his voice confirmed what Nora had hoped but needed to hear, that when forced to choose between career and family, Thaddeus would now make a different choice than he had 9 years ago. "We don't have an appointment yet," she reminded him gently, "and there's no indication of immediate danger. The test is precautionary. Still, I want to be there. For both of you." The subtext was clear. This was a family matter, and he intended to face it as a united front with Nora. "Okay," she agreed, a weight lifting from her shoulders at not having to handle this new worry alone. "We'll be here." Thaddeus arrived 45 minutes later, having left his executive team to manage the ongoing security crisis. His prioritization of Kieran's health over the company emergency spoke volumes about his transformed values. Together, they explained to Kieran the need for additional cardiac testing, framing it as a normal part of understanding his condition rather than a cause for alarm. Their son, ever the scientist, responded with curious questions about echocardiograms and aortic structures rather than fear, his resilience once again astonishing both parents. "So grandmother and I have the same genetic mutation?" he clarified, connecting the dots with his usual quickness. That's why she had a stroke. Similar conditions, yes, Thaddeus confirmed. But knowing about it early means we can monitor and manage it properly. You won't have the same outcome she did because we have this information now. It's actually fascinating from a genetic perspective, Kieran mused, already processing the news as an intellectual puzzle rather than a personal threat. I wonder if there are historical records of Lockhart family members with similar symptoms? We could create a pedigree chart tracing the inheritance pattern. His scientific detachment in the face of potentially serious health news both impressed and concerned his parents. That evening, after Kieran had gone to bed, Nora and Thaddeus sat in her small living room, the events of the past few days finally catching up with them. He's taking it remarkably well, Nora observed, cradling a cup of tea between her hands. Too well, maybe. I worry that he's intellectualizing instead of processing the emotional implications. He gets that from me, Thaddeus acknowledged ruefully. Converting feelings into facts, problems to be solved rather than experiences to be felt. And from me, Nora admitted. My default under stress has always been practical action rather than emotional expression. We've given him our best and worst traits, Thaddeus said with a small smile. Though in his case, they seemed to combine into something extraordinary. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the shared concern for their son creating a bridge between them that transcended their complicated personal history. I've been thinking about what you said on the plane, Nora said finally, about wanting us to be a real family again. Thaddeus looked up, hope and caution warring in his expression. And I've been watching you these past few days. With your parents. With Kieran. With the company crisis. She met his gaze directly. The man I knew 9 years ago would have stayed at the office through the night, prioritized the security patch over everything else, delegated personal matters until the professional emergency was resolved. I was that man once, Thaddeus acknowledged. I'd like to think I've learned better since then. You have, Nora confirmed softly. When I told you about Kieran's test results, you didn't hesitate. You chose him, chose us, over the company without a second thought. There was no choice to make, Thaddeus said simply. Nothing matters more than you and Kieran. The company, my parents' expectations, my professional reputation, they're all secondary to family. It just took me 9 years and nearly losing everything that truly matters to understand that. The sincerity in his voice, the absolute conviction of his priorities, finally broke through the protective walls Nora had maintained around her heart. I believe you, she said quietly. And yes, I want us to try again too. To be a real family, not just co-parents. The joy that transformed Thaddeus's tired features was answer enough, but he reached for her hand, entwining their fingers with gentle certainty. I won't make the same mistakes again, he promised. I know words aren't enough, but my actions will prove it every day. To both of you. Before Nora could respond, her doorbell rang, an unusual occurrence so late in the evening. When she opened the door, she found Imogen standing on her porch, looking travel-worn but determined. Imogen, Nora exclaimed in genuine surprise. What are you doing here? Kieran called me, Imogen explained, stepping inside when Nora moved aside to admit her. About his test results from the foundation. He was worried and didn't want to add to your stress, so he reached out to me instead. He called you? Thaddeus asked, rising from the sofa in confusion. When? This afternoon, after you both told him about the cardiac concerns. Imogen set down her small, overnight bag. I was in New York for a design conference, but I got on the first flight I could. The foundation has resources that might help, specialists, treatment protocols that aren't widely available yet. The fact that Kieran had reached out to Imogen rather than burdening his parents with his fears revealed both his emotional sensitivity and his problem-solving nature. It also demonstrated the unexpected family web that had formed since that fateful wedding weekend 6 months earlier. Imogen was no longer just Thaddeus's former fiancée or Nora's former friend, but a trusted adult in Kieran's life, someone he felt comfortable turning to in times of worry. That's incredibly kind of you, Nora said, genuinely touched by Imogen's immediate response to their son's concerns. But you didn't need to fly across the country. Actually, I did, Imogen corrected with a small smile. Because I brought something Kieran needs, Dr. Helena Reeves, the Foundation's leading pediatric cardiologist with expertise in connective tissue disorders. She's arriving tomorrow morning to consult on his case. You arranged a consultation with one of the top specialists in the field overnight? Thaddeus asked, clearly impressed. The foundation takes care of its research participants, Imogen said simply, especially those with rare genetic variants of particular interest to our studies, and especially when they're the children of people I care about. The simple declaration of continued care, despite the complicated history between them, moved both Nora and Thaddeus deeply. This was the Imogen that Nora had known in college, passionate, determined, and fiercely loyal once she committed to a cause or a person. Thank you, Thaddeus said with genuine gratitude, for being there for Kieran. For all of this. He's a remarkable child, Imogen replied with a warm smile. He deserves every advantage we can give him. She glanced between them, noting their clasped hands and proximate positions on the sofa. I see some things have changed since I've been away. We're figuring things out, Nora acknowledged, not dropping Thaddeus's hand despite the potential awkwardness of the situation, taking it one day at a time. Good, Imogen said with surprising sincerity. You two belong together. I think I always knew that, even when I was trying to convince myself otherwise. The three adults talked late into the night, discussing Kieran's medical needs, the foundation's resources, and the unexpected media attention now focused on their unusual family situation. By morning, they had developed a comprehensive plan. Kieran would see Dr. Reeves for evaluation. Thaddeus would make a public statement addressing both the company's security vulnerability and the inappropriate media focus on his minor son, and Nora would coordinate with the foundation on ongoing care protocols. When Kieran woke to find all three adults in his kitchen making breakfast together, his initial surprise quickly transformed into delight. You came, he exclaimed, throwing his arms around Imogen. And you brought a heart doctor? Dr. Reeves is the best there is, Imogen assured him. She's going to make sure we have all the information we need to keep you healthy and active. Like a complete cardiac profile with longitudinal monitoring parameters? Kieran asked eagerly, his vocabulary far exceeding his years. Exactly like that, Imogen confirmed with a laugh. She's looking forward to meeting such a well-informed patient. As they ate breakfast together, Thaddeus preparing pancakes, Nora cutting fruit, Imogen setting the table, Nora was struck by how naturally they had fallen into a collaborative pattern, like an extended family unit rather than the awkward triangle their history might have suggested. Kieran clearly thrived in this environment of multiple caring adults, moving between them with the easy confidence of a child who feels securely attached and thoroughly supported. Dr. Reeves's examination later that morning brought reassuring news. While Kieran did indeed have the genetic markers for cardiac involvement, his current aortic structure showed no signs of weakness or dilation. With proper monitoring and preventive care, his prognosis was excellent. We'll want echocardiograms every 6 months until he's fully grown, the specialist explained to the relieved parents. And he should avoid extreme competitive sports, but moderate physical activity is not just permitted but encouraged. Swimming, in particular, would be beneficial. I already like swimming better than team sports, Kieran announced from his perch on the examination table. The physics of water resistance is fascinating. Dr. Reeves smiled at her precocious patient. I can see why the foundation is so interested in your case, young man. Your combination of Ehlers-Danlos with this particular cardiac variant is rare, and your cognitive profile makes you an ideal research participant. You understand the concepts that most children your age wouldn't grasp. Does that mean I'm special? Kieran asked, adjusting his glasses. Very special, Dr. Reeves confirmed. But more importantly, you're going to be fine. The Foundation's treatment protocol is highly effective for your variant. The relief that washed over both Nora and Thaddeus was palpable. The medical crisis that had seemed so threatening just days before had transformed into a manageable condition with a clear treatment path, thanks to Imogen's connections and quick action. That evening, after Kieran had gone to bed and Imogen had retired to Nora's guest room, Thaddeus and Nora sat on the back porch swing, watching the stars emerge in the clear California sky. The past week had been a whirlwind of emotions and revelations, from the dinner interrupted by Cordelia's stroke to the tense family dynamics in Boston, from the company crisis to Kieran's medical concerns. Through it all, they had found their way back to each other, not through grand romantic gestures or dramatic declarations, but through the steady, consistent prioritization of what truly mattered. their son's well-being, and the family unit they were rebuilding day by day. "I called the office earlier," Thaddeus said, breaking the comfortable silence. The engineering team implemented a fix based partly on Kieran's insight about the authentication vulnerability. "Early tests show it's working perfectly." "That's wonderful news," Nora said, genuinely happy for him. "So the company crisis is resolved?" "The technical crisis, yes," Thaddeus confirmed. "The media attention is another matter. Between the security breach and the child genius identifies flaw angle, we're receiving more press than I'd prefer." "Is it affecting Lockhart Innovations negatively?" "Surprisingly, no. The narrative has shifted to focus on how quickly we addressed the vulnerability and the innovative approach to the solution." Thaddeus's arm tightened slightly around her shoulders. "But there's been some spillover attention to our personal lives. Questions about Kieran, about our history, about why he was unknown to the public until recently." Nora tensed slightly. "That's exactly what I was afraid of when we first reunited. Kieran being thrust into the spotlight because of your public profile." "I know," Thaddeus acknowledged. "And I'm doing everything possible to shield him from unwanted attention. The company's PR team is deflecting personal questions, and our lawyers have sent cease and desist letters to outlets publishing information about him." "But," Nora prompted, sensing his hesitation, "but complete privacy may be difficult to maintain. The Lockhart name carries certain visibility, especially now that my parents are involved in Kieran's life." He turned to face her directly. "Which brings me to what I wanted to discuss. About our future." "I'm listening," Nora said, though her heart had begun to beat faster with anticipation. "I want us to face this together, the media attention, my parents' expectations, the balance between public and private life. Not just as co-parents, but as partners in every sense." Thaddeus took her hand, his expression earnest in the dim porch light. "I'm not asking for marriage, not yet. That's a conversation for another day, when we've had more time to rebuild what was broken. But I am asking for commitment. For us to be a family in every way that matters." "What exactly are you proposing?" Nora asked, needing clarity despite the emotion of the moment. "That we live together. That we face the world as a united front. That we give Kieran the stability of a home with both his parents under one roof." Thaddeus's voice was steady, his conviction clear. "Not here, not at my place, but somewhere new that we choose together. A fresh start." The offer touched Nora deeply, not just the practicalities of shared living, but the symbolism of creating something new together rather than one of them moving into the other's established space. It represented genuine partnership rather than absorption of one life into another. "Yes," she said simply. "I want that too. For Kieran, for us, for the family we're rebuilding." The joy that transformed Thaddeus's expression was answer enough, but he leaned forward to seal their agreement with a kiss, gentle at first, then deepening with the rekindled connection that had never fully disappeared despite their years apart. 1 year later, the new house stood on a hillside overlooking the bay, large enough for comfort but modest by Lockhart standards, a compromise between Nora's practical sensibilities and Thaddeus's desire to provide space for their growing family life. The architecture blended modern lines with warm materials, much like the family itself balanced innovation with traditional values. In the backyard, a celebration was underway, the 1-year anniversary of Kieran's successful cardiac treatment protocol, and, unofficially, the reunion of his parents as a committed couple. Colorful lanterns hung from trees, tables overflowed with food, and laughter rang out as friends and family gathered to celebrate not just Kieran's health, but the rebuilding of connections once thought irreparably broken. Cordelia Lockhart, now fully recovered from her stroke save for a slight weakness in her left hand, sat in animated conversation with Dr. Reeves about the genetic research the foundation was conducting. Even Ambrose had mellowed somewhat, though he still occasionally slipped into lectures about Lockhart family traditions when he thought no one was paying attention. Imogen had brought her new partner, a marine biologist she'd met during a coastal restoration project, and the two were helping Kieran set up his telescope for the evening stargazing session he had planned for the younger guests. Quite the gathering, Thaddeus observed, joining Nora at the edge of the patio where she stood watching the interactions with quiet satisfaction. Not exactly how I imagined my life would look a year ago. Better or worse? She asked, leaning into his side as his arms circled her waist. Infinitely better, he replied without hesitation. Though I could do without my father's attempts to recruit Kieran for summer finance camp. Nora laughed, the sound light and genuine. He's persistent, I'll give him that. But Kieran's already told him 3 times that he's committed to the Foundation's research program this summer. Your father will have to accept that his grandson has his own priorities. A trait he comes by honestly, Thaddeus noted with a smile. From both sides of his family, their comfortable banter was interrupted by Kieran's approach, his expression serious behind his glasses. Mom, Dad, I need your approval on something important. What is it, sweetheart? Nora asked, immediately attentive. Grandfather wants to establish a trust fund for my education and future research, Kieran explained. He says it's a Lockhart tradition, but I told him I needed to discuss it with both of you first. Nora and Thaddeus exchanged a quick glance, their silent communication reflecting the partnership they had built over the past year. What do you think about it? Thaddeus asked their son, valuing his input rather than imposing a decision. I think having resources for education is practical, Kieran replied thoughtfully. But I don't want special advantages that other kids don't have. It doesn't seem fair. His response reflected the values both parents had worked to instill, awareness of privilege combined with responsibility toward others. What if the trust included provisions for sharing educational opportunities? Nora suggested. Scholarships for other students, funding for public school science programs? Kieran's face brightened. That would be acceptable. Ethical wealth distribution rather than concentration. I believe we've raised a social philosopher, Thaddeus observed with pride. We'll discuss terms with grandfather together as a family. Any trust should reflect our shared values, not just Lockhart traditions. As Kieran nodded and returned to his telescope setup, Nora leaned closer to Thaddeus. He's remarkable, she said softly. Every day, I see more evidence of the best of both of us in him. And none of our worst flaws, thankfully, Thaddeus added with a smile. He has your compassion and my focus, but none of my arrogance or your stubborn independence. I prefer to call it determined self-reliance, Nora corrected primly, making him laugh. Speaking of determined self-reliance, Thaddeus said, his tone shifting to something more serious. There's something I've been wanting to ask you. Something I've been carrying around for weeks, waiting for the right moment. The shift in his demeanor caught Nora's attention. What is it? Instead of answering directly, Thaddeus reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. I know we agreed to take things slowly, to rebuild our foundation before making permanent commitments. But this past year has shown me everything I need to know about us, about who we are together, about the family we can be. Nora's breath caught as he opened the box to reveal a ring unlike any traditional engagement setting. Instead of a diamond solitaire, it featured an intricate design of intertwined bands, rose gold, white gold, and platinum, coming together to hold not one stone, but 3 small ones representing each of them. It's not traditional, Thaddeus acknowledged. But then, neither are we. Our path hasn't been straight or simple, but it's brought us exactly where we're meant to be. Together, Nora finished for him, emotion making her voice unsteady. Together, he confirmed. Nora Sinclair, will you marry me? Not because it's expected or traditional or practical, but because I love you more deeply now than I did 15 years ago when we first met. Because the family we've built deserves the commitment that marriage represents. Nora looked from the unique ring to the man holding it, the man who had once broken her heart, but had spent the past year proving through consistent actions that he had truly changed, that family now came first in his priorities, that his love was steady and reliable rather than conditional. Yes, she said simply. Yes, I will marry you. As Thaddeus slipped the ring onto her finger, cheers erupted from around the garden. They looked up to find their entire gathering watching the proposal with evident delight, Cordelia wiping away tears, Imogen giving a thumbs up, even Ambrose managing a grudging smile of approval. And at the center of it all stood Kieran, his face alight with the pure joy of a child whose deepest wish has been granted. Does this mean we're officially a family now? He called out, adjusting his glasses with one finger. We've always been a family, Nora replied, reaching out to include him in their embrace. The paperwork is just catching up with reality. As the 3 of them stood together, surrounded by friends and extended family under the early evening sky, Nora reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. 9 years of separation, 6 months of cautious co-parenting, 1 year of rebuilding trust and creating new patterns. The path had been neither straight nor easy, but every step, even the painful ones, had been necessary to bring them where they belonged. Together, a family not just by blood or law, but by choice, by love, by the daily decision to prioritize connection over all else. And as Kieran pointed out, the first evening star appearing above them, Nora and Thaddeus exchanged a look of profound understanding. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Kieran's health, family expectations, professional demands, they would face them united, stronger together than they had ever been apart. In the end, that was what family truly meant, not perfect harmony or absence of struggle, but the commitment to walk through life's complexities side by side, choosing each other every day, building something beautiful from what had once been broken. If this story of second chances touched your heart, make sure to subscribe for more powerful stories about love, forgiveness, and the courage to rebuild what once seemed lost. Because sometimes life's most unexpected detours lead us exactly where we're meant to be, if we're brave enough to follow the path home.